I manage a tech office in Berlin. Last month we hired this American product manager named Greg, who seemed sharp until his first Betriebsrat meeting. He walked in 15 minutes late carrying coffee, looked at the elected employee representative sitting across from management, and asked why union people were in a company meeting. I explained 3 times these weren't union members, but our legally mandated works council, who had to approve his new performance tracking software. He kept saying, "But this is a private company decision," like he'd discovered a constitutional violation. When Petra from accounting, a council member, said they needed 2 weeks to review his proposal, Greg suggested we work around them by launching it anyway. The room went silent. I had to explain that ignoring the Works Council was literally a criminal offense in Germany. And Greg looked at me like I'd just said we sacrifice goats on Tuesdays. He spent the next hour trying to negotiate, offering the council a seat at the table for future projects, completely missing that they already had that seat by law. He pitched it like a generous concession. When I mentioned the council had co-determination rights on working time arrangements, he asked if we could phase that out gradually once they trusted him more. Petra just stared. By the end, Greg was convinced we were being held hostage by our own employees and kept muttering about right-to-work states last week. Greg tried scheduling a 7 a.m. meeting, and the Works Council shut it down within an hour. He's now asking HR if there's a council-free zone in the office, where management can make decisions. I'm teaching him German labor law, one incident at a time. It's going to be a long year. I work reception at a manufacturing company in Dusseldorf. And in March, we brought in this American efficiency consultant named Brad to streamline operations. His first recommendation was eliminating our monthly Betriebsrat meetings because too many meetings kill productivity. I watched our plant manager explain that Works Council meetings were required by law. Brad nodded sympathetically and said, "I get it, but maybe we grandfather this facility out as a special case." He genuinely thought you could file paperwork to exempt a factory from having worker representation. When I clarified that the Works Council had existed here since 1952 and was protected by federal law, he suggested we at least move the meetings to lunch hours so they didn't interfere with real work. The plant manager's face went through several expressions before he managed to say the meetings happened during work hours by right, and the company paid council members for that time. Brad's response was, "You're paying them to complain about you," like he'd uncovered embezzlement. He spent his entire 3-month contract trying to optimize away a constitutional labor right, submitting proposals to replace the council with a suggestion box. My brother runs a logistics firm outside Amsterdam, and last year he hired this American operations director named Michelle, who seemed competent until she met our Ondernemingsraad. She sat through one meeting where the Works Council reviewed a proposed shift schedule change, then pulled my brother aside to ask why he was letting employees vote on management decisions. He explained they weren't voting, just exercising their right to consent on employment matters affecting 50-plus workers. Michelle said, "Right, but in practice, you can just override them if they're being unrealistic, correct?" My brother very carefully explained that no, the Works Council withheld consent on social matters. The decision didn't happen unless we went to court. Michelle's exact words were, "So you're saying 5 random? Warehouse workers can veto the operations." Director she genuinely couldn't process. That Jerome from shipping had more authority over scheduled changes than she did. She kept trying to implement provisional policies before getting council approval, explaining that it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. My brother had to keep explaining that Dutch labor law didn't recognize that philosophy. Michelle lasted 6 months before taking a job in Dubai, citing cultural fit issues with local management. Structure. We found her exit interview notes suggesting the company reclaim decision-making authority from non-management. Personnel. I'm a floor manager at a pharmaceutical plant in Lyon. And last year, we hired this American project manager named Donna to oversee a facility expansion. Her first week, she scheduled a big planning session and got annoyed when I said we needed to wait for the CSE meeting first. She asked what CSE stood for, and when I said Kumoit Social, ETH Economec, she said, "Oh, like an employee engagement committee," and suggested we brief them afterward instead. I explained the CSE had to be informed and consulted before major decisions affecting workplace structure, and their consultation wasn't optional. Donna said informed and consulted, sure, but they don't actually have decision power, right? Like she was confirming a technicality. When I mentioned the CSE could delay decisions and had to approve certain employment policy changes, she looked physically uncomfortable. She kept asking who appointed them, and when I said employees elected them, she muttered something about inmates running the asylum. During the actual CSE meeting, Donna presented the expansion plan and tried to move on after 5 minutes. The CSE chairperson said they needed 3 weeks to review the implications. Donna smiled tightly and said, "I appreciate your input, but we're announcing this to investors in 10 days. The silence that followed was remarkable. I had to explain that announcing without proper consultation could get the decision legally nullified. And Donna spent the next 20 minutes arguing that surely there was a fast-track option for time-sensitive projects. There wasn't. She now sends all facility updates to the CSE 6 weeks in, advance and complains to anyone who will listen about bureaucratic overreach by breakroom committees, a maintenance supervisor at a tech company in Rotterdam. And 2 years ago, we hired this American VP named Kyle who'd worked in Silicon Valley and thought he understood modern workplaces. His first month, he announced a new policy requiring all employees to be reachable by Slack outside work hours for urgent issues. I told him we needed Works Council approval for that. Kyle laughed and said the council reviewed benefit changes and safety stuff, not communication tools. I explained that after-hours contact expectations were absolutely within their right of consent on working conditions. Kyle said it's just a chat app, not a contractual obligation, like that was a legal distinction. He implemented it anyway, calling it a soft rollout. Within 3 days, the Ondernemingsraad sent a formal objection. Kyle tried explaining to them that this was standard in tech and they were behind the times. The council chairperson, a DevOps engineer named Saskia, pointed out that what was standard in California wasn't binding in the Netherlands, and working time regulations applied whether delivered by phone, email, or Slack. Kyle suggested a compromise, where it was voluntary but strongly encouraged. Explained there was no such thing in Dutch labor law as voluntary but strongly encouraged regarding work outside contracted hours. Kyle eventually had to roll back the entire policy, and I heard him tell someone on a call that the Netherlands was allergic to innovation because employees had legal protections. Last month, he tried implementing core collaboration hours from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and got the same response. He's slowly learning that your previous company's culture doesn't overrule national labor statutes. My wife works HR at a financial services firm in Hamburg, and last spring they hired this American director named Ashley who came from Wall Street. Her first week proposed a new attendance tracking system that flagged anyone arriving after 8:45 a.m. My wife said they'd need Works Council approval for that level of monitoring. Ashley said it's just data. It doesn't affect anyone's job. My wife explained that systematic collection of employee attendance data absolutely required Works Council consent under co-determination rules. Ashley responded that the council could review it after implementation if they wanted. She seemed to think consultation meant optional notification. When the Betriebsrat met about it, Ashley attended and opened with "I know change is hard, but trust me. This is best practice from the U.S. financial sector." One council member asked if she'd read the Works Constitution Act. Ashley said she'd skimmed the employee handbook, missing that it was federal law, not company policy. She tried explaining that monitoring makes people more accountable. And the council chair, an analyst named Jurgen, said accountability didn't supersede privacy rights and co-determination. Ashley asked if there was an appeals process for council decisions. There wasn't. She eventually implemented a voluntary self-reporting system instead, and still sends my wife's articles about how European labor laws are stifling data-driven management. Last I heard, she's lobbying headquarters to relocate the entire division to London post-Brexit because she thinks UK employment law is more business-friendly. I work IT support at a distribution center in Eindhoven, and last year we got this American warehouse manager named Todd who'd run Amazon facilities in the States. His first month, he installed cameras in the break room to optimize downtime. I wasn't even the one who told him this was a problem. The Ondernemingsraad showed up at his office 3 hours later. Todd explained the cameras were for efficiency analytics, not surveillance. The council said surveillance was exactly what it was, and they hadn't consented to monitoring employee break time. Todd said, "I'm not monitoring breaks. I'm monitoring facility usage patterns." The council chairperson, a forklift operator named Martesian, said that was linguistic gymnastics and monitoring breaks was monitoring breaks. Todd tried pivoting, saying the cameras were actually for security. Martesian asked why security cameras needed to track how long people sat in the break room. Todd said that was just a feature of the software. Martesian asked why he'd selected software with that feature if it wasn't the intended use. Todd stopped responding and just looked at his laptop. The council ordered the cameras removed from break areas entirely, and Todd tried arguing that he'd already paid for the installation. Martesian said that was a business decision Todd made without consultation and wasn't the council's problem. Todd took the cameras down and now refers to the Works Council as the Oversight Committee, like they're monitoring him specifically. He's technically correct, just not in the way he thinks. I work facilities management at a software company in Nantes. And last year we hired this American CTO named Ryan who had big ideas about workplace culture. He announced we were implementing fun mandatory team lunches every Wednesday, where everyone had to eat together to build camaraderie. I mentioned to him that mandatory lunch activities would need CSE consultation. Ryan said it's not mandatory, it's just expected. I explained that expected was mandatory. The CSE needed to review anything affecting how employees spent their break time. Ryan said this is about culture, not labor law. Yes. I said culture didn't override the Comite Social et Economiques consultation rights. He implemented it anyway, sent a company-wide email framing it as an exciting new initiative. The CSE sent him a formal request to suspend the policy pending their review. Ryan replied to their email saying, "I appreciate the feedback, but this is moving forward," like they'd made a suggestion. It's not a legal requirement. The CSE scheduled a meeting and Ryan attended, expecting a conversation. They informed him the mandatory lunches violated employees' right to use their break time freely and had to stop immediately. Ryan said people can opt out if they really want to. The CSE said the framing is mandatory made, opting out socially coercive, and that didn't solve the issue. Ryan asked if they'd be okay with strongly encouraged lunches. They said no. He left the meeting and told his management. The CSE was against team building, he now schedules optional lunches that almost nobody attends and blames French individualism. CSE sends him reminders every few months about the consultation. Requirements he keeps forgetting. My sister manages an engineering firm in Stockholm, and last year they brought in this American director named Stephanie who'd worked in Texas. Her first project was implementing a new project management system that tracked time spent on every task. She announced it at a staff meeting, and one of the engineers asked if the safety representative had reviewed it. Stephanie asked what a safety representative had to do with project management software. The engineer explained that systematic workplace monitoring had work. Environment implications and their Skydsambod needed to be consulted. Stephanie said it's not monitoring, it's transparency. The safety rep, an engineer named Anders, said transparency was monitoring with positive branding. Stephanie said everyone was overthinking this and it was just a tool. Anders said tools that tracked employee activity minute by minute fell under his mandate to review work environment factors, and the union would back that assessment. Stephanie asked if the union could veto software purchases. My sister had to explain that while unions didn't directly veto, the safety rep could file objections that required response, and ignoring those could lead to work environment authority involvement. Stephanie looked appalled and said, "So one person can derail a company-wide efficiency initiative." Sister said that's how co-determination worked? And Stephanie should have consulted before purchasing the software. Stephanie tried implementing it on a voluntary pilot basis. And Anders said voluntary pilots for monitoring systems normalized surveillance culture and still needed review. Stephanie gave up and now asks Anders about everything in advance, complaining that Sweden is where innovation goes to die in committee. She brings up Texas constantly like it's evidence we're doing it wrong. I'm a compliance officer at a chemical plant in Munich. And last year we got this American safety manager named Derek, who came from DuPont. He proposed monthly safety audits conducted by external consultants. I told him the Works Council would need to be involved since audits affected working conditions. Derek said this is safety, not labor relations. I explained that safety was explicitly a codetermination matter in German law, and the Betriebsrat had to be consulted on safety measures. Derek said consulted fine, but they can't block safety improvements, right? I said they could if implementation violated other rights, or if proper consultation didn't occur. Derek looked confused and said, "What if we just frame it as management, reviewing management?" I said the audits would affect workers, making them subject to codetermination regardless of framing. He scheduled the first audit without council involvement. The Betriebsrat found out and filed an objection. Derek told them he'd send them the results afterward, completely missing that consultation meant beforehand. The council chair said they weren't interested in results from an unapproved process. Derek tried explaining that American chemical plants conducted these audits routinely and safety improved. The chair said German plants already had high safety standards and that didn't address the consultation requirement. Derek asked what would happen if he continued the audits. The chair said the council could petition the labor court. Derek canceled the audits and spent 2 weeks telling anyone who'd listened that Germany put bureaucracy ahead of safety. He now runs everything past the council first and describes it as clearing it with the employee board like we're asking. Permission for middle schoolers. My cousin works logistics at a pharmaceutical company in Utrecht. And last year they hired this American supply chain director named Jennifer who'd worked at Walmart. She implemented a new break schedule that staggered bathroom breaks to maintain floor coverage. Nobody could take a break simultaneously. She sent the schedule to all teams and considered it done. The Unternehmensrat contacted her that afternoon. Jennifer took the meeting confused about what they wanted. They explained that break scheduling was a social matter requiring their consent. Jennifer said, "I scheduled breaks, I didn't eliminate them, so this is fine, right?" The council said how breaks were scheduled absolutely required consent, and unilateral implementation without consultation invalidated the decision. Jennifer said she'd checked with HR and they'd approved it. The council said HR didn't replace their consent rights. Jennifer tried a different angle, explaining that the old system created coverage gaps, and this was objectively better. The council said objective improvement didn't override consultation requirements. Jennifer needed to withdraw the schedule and request their consent properly. Jennifer said, "Okay, I'm requesting it now. Can we move forward?" The council said they needed time to review the proposal and consult with affected workers. Jennifer asked how long. The council said at least 2 weeks. Jennifer visibly struggled with this and said, "What do I do about coverage until then?" The council said she should have thought of that before implementing without consultation. She's now on her 4th break schedule revision and tells people. The Netherlands has a veto culture because one planning decision has taken 3 months. The Works Council keeps explaining they'd have consented to a reasonable proposal if she'd asked first instead of implementing and then negotiating. I work regional HR for an insurance company in Marseille. And last year we hired this American VP named Greg, who came from a Chicago firm. He decided to reorganize our claims department, consolidating 3 teams into 2. He announced it at a management meeting. I asked if he'd informed the CSE. Greg said he would after the reorganization was complete. I explained the CSE had to be consulted beforehand on any decision affecting workforce structure. Greg said it's not affecting workers, it's affecting the org chart. Said the org chart represented workers and their reporting relationships, making this a mandatory consultation topic. Greg looked irritated and asked how long consultation took. I said usually a month, sometimes longer for complex changes. Greg said I'm not waiting a month to fix an inefficiency. Said he didn't have a choice. French law mandated the consultation. Greg asked if we could do a quick consultation, like 48 hours. I said the CSE had the right to bring in external experts if needed, and that timelines weren't negotiable. Greg implemented the reorganization anyway, figuring he'd apologize later if needed. The CSE filed a challenge in court. Greg seemed shocked that they'd actually sue over a consultation process. His lawyer explained the court would likely reverse the reorganization and potentially fine the company. Greg asked how that was legal, and the lawyer said that's what happens when you ignore mandatory consultation. The whole reorganization got unwound 6 months later, and Greg now describes France as hostile to change management.